Alright, so today I want to show you 8 ball python morphs that are over $1,000 just for the single morphs. This doesn't really include the combos. Just to get into some of these high-end projects, it's going to cost you at least $1,000 and climb up from there. And if you're thinking about getting into ball pythons, kind of what I did is I started kind of in the mid-range all the way to the low end. I produced quite a few low-end ball pythons, but I would think if you really want to do really well and really invest heavily up front, you could probably invest in some of these projects and do really well in the long term. So I'm going to jump over to the internet and show you some of these amazing morphs. Alright, so I'm going to start over here on morphmarket.com, and this website has tens of thousands of ball pythons you can look at. I was browsing through all the snakes for sale and that have sold and kind of narrowed it down just to 8 morphs that I would actually think about investing in if I had, you know, a few $1,000s looking at single gene morphs. And the first one that I ran across is the micro scale. And if you look at the micro scale, it starts at about $1,000, which is pretty amazing. As a matter of fact, if you don't know what the micro scale is, it's another line of the scaleless head. So if you look on this snake, it has a few scales missing from the head. But the interesting thing is it's not only just a separate line of scaleless head. If you look really close at the face on some of these snakes, just one copy of the gene with the micro scale actually doesn't have any heat pits on the face, where you'll actually see the little heat pits on the face of the scaleless head, which is kind of interesting. The other thing I find extremely interesting is that this is, even though it's a different line of scaleless head, the prices are a lot higher. So for example, this year I produced some scaleless head, and kind of the low end for scaleless head now is about $250 plus shipping. And you can see that is a huge difference between that and this micro scale. The other thing that's interesting about micro scale is that the scales on the one copy of the gene with the scaleless head, the micro scale head, actually the scales feel completely different on the micro scale. They're like little bumps instead of scales, which is really interesting. It's like the whole thing is covered with micro scales. I think that's where they get the name. So it's kind of an interesting project if you're looking at something down the scaleless line. And as far as I know, both of the completely scaleless ball pythons with the scaleless head and the micro scale almost look completely identical. I don't think there's any differences there. You just have to know where it originated from. So if you kind of look at the low end to get into this project, you're looking at about $1,000. And then what I did is I pulled up another one that is pretty much the high end for the micro scale. This is the most expensive one that's actually for sale. This one is selling for $3,500. So if you're looking for multiple genes in the micro scale, you're actually going to pay some pretty big money. This is actually the Pastel butter micro scale. Pretty interesting, and it almost seems like it acts like kind of like the scaleless head, where it kind of thins out the scales a little bit and enhances the color of the snake, even though it's not completely scaleless. And I've seen that on a lot of my scaleless heads, where if I mix it into lesser, that particular scaleless head lesser is a lot more brighter and contrasty than any of my lessers without the scaleless head. It's kind of interesting. And another one I pulled up, this one is the totally scaleless ball python. There's only one here on Morph Market. This is a scaleless ball python that originated from the micro scale line of the scaleless ball python. Pretty amazing animal. This is actually called the super micro scale Pinstripe Enchi ball python. And this sold for $30,000. Pretty amazing, just last year too. So micro scale is kind of like the newest line of the scaleless ball python that is a little bit higher price than, you know, it's kind of like the same prices as the scaleless head when it started out. It's almost, well, actually, when I first got into ball pythons, scaleless head ball pythons were selling for $45,000 just for one copy of the gene, the scaleless head. So this is kind of like right on the tail, maybe a little bit newer, kind of the newest line of the scale. It's a pretty interesting project. And speaking of scaleless, totally scaleless, so this is, I actually went to pull up the completely scaleless ball pythons that originated from the Scaleless headline. And believe it or not, you can actually pick them up. This has kind of surprised me. A totally scaleless ball python, a female, for as low as $3,000, which is pretty amazing. I can't believe how fast the scaleless have come down. A lot of people are into that project, so they pretty much start at $3,000. And you can see this one is the first one up at the top left here is listed as the Scaleless Yellow-Bellied, but it's actually a scaleless head, not the full scaleless. It's listed wrong, and it's $300 for scaleless head. You know, with another gene on top of that, and you compare that to the $1,000 micro scale, pretty big price differences for the different lines. So here's another one that is a completely scaleless ball python, originated from the Scaleless headline. It's a little bit confusing between the two lines. This is actually for sale. This is the highest price one I could find that's actually for sale for $8,500. Still bringing in quite a bit of money if you jump into the multi-gene, completely scaleless. And then I pulled up another one, pretty much the most impressive scaleless ball python that I've seen that originated from the Scaleless headline, and then that's just a straight pastel. It seems like these pastels, sometimes they can really pop out the yellow color with the scaleless. It seems like that is the most intense. This one actually sold for $3,000. Pretty amazing. So another gene that you may be interested in, if you want to get away from the scaleless, you want to invest some money, there are a few more genes I want to cover, and that is, one of them is the Tri-Stripe. Tri-Stripe's pretty awesome. I almost got into the project when I first started in ball pythons, and I probably should have. There's not a lot of people into Tri-Stripes, so there's not a lot of, you know, the genes on the market to actually flood the market and drive the price down like there was on a lot of the scaleless. And if you look at, actually sorted by the visual Tri-Stripe, it's actually a recessive gene, and this kind of mixes in some of the hets with the visuals, so you have to actually scroll down a bit to actually get your first visual. The first visual is right here. The cheapest you can get into this project from the prices here on Morph Market is $1,500 for a visual, so it has 2 copies of the gene. And the most expensive one over here on Morph Market, this one is actually almost $6,000. It's an albino tri-stripe female, and it looks like it's proven on a clutch of eggs. Pretty impressive snake. As a matter of fact, I pulled up another one. It's probably my favorite tri-stripe. This is an albino tri-stripe with paradoxing through. It looks pretty amazing with the little black splotches all through the snake. And keep in mind, the paradox is not genetic, so if you actually bred this with another albino tri-stripe, more than likely you wouldn't get the little black spots through the snake. Here's another ball python that's morph that's kind of interesting. I haven't really studied this one a lot, and that is the static. I've seen some pretty interesting combos with the static. It's one of the newer genes that I haven't not really familiar with, but I was kind of looking for, you know, some of the projects to get into that aren't really mainstream, a little more niche projects that are higher dollars. And it looks like to get into the static project, it's $1,500 for the cheapest snake. And if you come over here to the most expensive one, the most expensive one is $4,500 for a static 100% het pied. Pretty awesome snake. And it's kind of interesting how the static kind of jumbles up the pattern on some of these morphs. This is actually just a straight static. This is essentially what the static looks like. And then the het pied normally has very minimal influence as far as the pattern. But I actually pulled up probably my favorite static, and that is the static highway. Look at that thing. That thing is screaming. It's interesting how it really changes the color and the pattern on the static highway. So this is the yellow-belly gravel with the static added on top of it. So here's another morph that I should have got into early on that, you know, I'm kind of kicking myself. I probably should have got into some of these higher end niche projects, and I probably would have done a little bit better as far as, you know, making money in the long term and kind of capturing a niche market as far as ball pythons. One of those is the puzzle, and it's kind of interesting. If you look at the puzzle, the cheapest one you can get a visual is $1,750. It's a recessive mutation, so even the hets, you know, know, you can actually get into the project with the hets, but you know, personally, I would actually rather spend the money, save the time, and get into the visuals. So if you're looking at, you know, a couple of these, you're probably looking at about $4,000 for a pair of puzzles. Pretty incredible. And I actually looked at the most expensive one. This one was actually on hold, but it's one of the more recent ones. This one's actually $3,000. And take a look at that. The puzzle, essentially what it does is it puts kind of this stripe down the kind of the side of it and kind of mixes it up, which is kind of interesting. But if you look kind of at the base puzzle, it almost looks like a weird kind of a puzzle pattern on the snake. I think that's where they get the puzzle from. It's kind of interesting. And pretty much my favorite puzzle that I found on Morph Market here. This one sold for $3,500, and that is just a super pastel with the puzzle in it. And you know, I always look at some of these combos because I want to know if it has some really awesome potential as far as what it can do with other morphs. That's kind of one of the biggest things I'm looking at. It's not only about making money, but it's also about making beautiful snakes that are in high demand that people will definitely want. So here's another project that's going to cost you a little bit more. This one is the Sunset project, another recessive morph. And when I first got into ball pythons, all I could find were hets, and the prices were so outrageous. There's no way I could get into the hets. And now they've come down significantly. Looks like the lowest priced one is a female for $4,000. And you can see some of the combos on here that are pretty impressive as far as the Sunsets. So you're looking at about $8,000 or $9,000 for a pair. Pretty high-end project. And the most expensive one for sale that I could find is $35,000. Pretty amazing. This is actually a double recessive, a Sunset Clown. Pretty awesome morph. And I actually went over here for my favorite Sunset that was, you know, for sale or sold on all of Morph Market. And this is the Banana Pastel Sunset. That thing is screaming. That is the potential of the Sunset. You can make some really awesome combos. So here's another one that I was kind of looking at, and I'm not sure if I want to dive into this or not. This is the Monarch. And the Monarch, I would say, is really close, is pretty close to the Ultramel, but it's a little bit different than the Ultramel. It's kind of interesting how someone, the backstory behind the Monarch, someone just bought a couple snakes, bred them together, and popped out one of these and proved it to be genetic as recessive. Pretty amazing. And the cheapest price for a Monarch right now, 2019 here on Morph Market, that is $4,000. So they're still really bringing in a really high price tag to get into the Monarchs. This is the most expensive one I found for sale. This is for sale for $6,000, a Monarch Genetic Stripe Pastel. And the Genetic Stripe is also a recessive, and the Monarch is recessive. So this is, you know, the double recessives are really hard to hit, and that is a lot of times that's why the prices are really high on a lot of these double recessives. So as far as all the Monarchs that I found, I think just the straight Monarch is one of my favorite. This is what a Monarch looks like. You can definitely tell now that it's, you know, a little bit older here in this picture. Definitely different than the Ultramel. Kind of an interesting color. And I noticed they kind of changed colors a little bit. They almost start like an Ultramel, and they kind of change to this kind of really unique color. Really sharp, defined contrast in the color of the Monarch. I thought that was interesting. So one last one I want to show you if you're into really high-end ball pythons, and that is the Monsoon, kind of a brand new project that, as a matter of fact, is first produced by Dave Green, and he just kind of popped out a random genetic anomaly that proved genetic. This is another recessive mutation, and this pretty much, I think Dave Green has most of the Monsoons right now. I don't think anyone really has hatchlings for sale. And if you come over here, there's none for sale. You just have to sort by the ones that have sold because people have grabbed them all. And it's pretty amazing. They're about $15,000 or $16,000 for the Monsoon. Crazy project. And I pulled one up here. This is what a Monsoon looks like. That is really crazy. You know, if I had $30,000, I might invest in a pair of Monsoon. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And Doug Barnes asks, When I'm incubating my ball python eggs, do I have ventilation holes in the tubs? And that is a very good question. As a matter of fact, I don't have ventilation holes. I pretty much just use press and seal over the entire box, the 6-quart tub of ball python eggs. And essentially what I do is I put a 50-50 vermiculite water mixture in the bottom by weight, and then I put like an egg crate above it, and then I put the ball python eggs right on the egg crate, and then put press and seal right on top, and don't have any ventilation holes. And then I incubate it for about 2 months at 90 degrees. And the interesting thing is, when I first started in ball pythons, I actually had quite a bit of ventilation in some of my egg boxes, and some of my eggs really dried out too much. Even though I tried to control the humidity in my incubator, it really wasn't enough humidity, and you can definitely tell the eggs start shrinking down to where they're almost like a flattened out egg after a few weeks, and that is definitely not good, and in most cases those eggs won't hatch. And I've pretty much found the idea. I was looking at YouTube videos, and there's one guy on YouTube that says they don't need any air, they don't need any ventilation. You just take the box and you put the press and seal right on top with no ventilation at all. And let me tell you, that kind of freaked me out. I didn't think there was enough air in the box that those eggs could breathe, or when they hatch, that the hatchlings can breathe. And believe it or not, it seems like the air can actually transfer right through the press and seal, and it's perfectly fine. I've had probably, I'd say, almost 150, almost 200 eggs that have hatched in that, and I've never lost any eggs or a whole box from apparently not enough air. So that is pretty much it. I have just a little bit of drone footage I want to throw in at the end. I kind of tested my drone out, still trying to get used to it. I just flew it around my house and around my cows. I'm going to show you that drone footage. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.